It was early morning, and the house was unusually quiet. I opened my eyes to see flashing lights outside the window. My father's oxygen machine was blinking, the red light glaring like an emergency beacon. I rushed downstairs, only to find Mrs. Dawson, the neighborhood busybody, in a heated argument with a paramedic in the driveway. She was complaining about noise, about how her rights were being violated, when I overheard something that made my stomach drop. "Ma'am, you might have just caused someone to die," the EMT said, his voice flat and serious. "If you're wondering how anyone could possibly mess up something like that, how someone could be so careless and not notice, trust me, I was wondering the same thing. Let me rewind. Just hours earlier, I'd gone to bed, exhausted after spending most of the evening tracking my dad's oxygen levels on my phone. He had severe asthma and COPD, a combo that meant his lungs were a ticking time bomb. We were living in survival mode. If you've never lived with someone who relies on oxygen 24/7, imagine the sound of an engine running nonstop. Now, imagine the engine is always in the background, humming louder when the power goes out. It's a noisy, constant reminder of how fragile life is. But Mrs. Dawson didn't care. She was the neighborhood HOA president, a woman with an iron grip on every little detail of the community. She treated the HOA rules like law and had a knack for pushing the smallest issues into major problems. I had moved back in with my dad after he fell last year, and since then, it had been a constant battle with Mrs. Dawson. Once, she gave me a warning for putting up a wind chime that disrupted the emotional peace of the neighborhood. That's right, emotional peace. But sabotaging my dad's life support? I never thought she would go that far. Yet she had. Just the night before, there had been a small storm, enough to cause a brief flicker in the power. I checked on Dad, made sure the backup generator was ready for a potential outage, then went to sleep. At 2:45 a.m., the power blinked off long enough for the backup to turn on. That's when Mrs. Dawson, in her fluffy robe and a sense of self-righteousness, decided it was time to make her move. She walked over, unplugged the generator like it was just another appliance. My dad was already asleep. Without the machine, he didn't have a chance to call for help. He just stopped breathing. When I woke up, something felt wrong. The silence in the house was deafening. I checked the app on my phone, but the machine wasn't responding. I ran into his room and found him looking ghostly pale. His lips had a faint blue tint, and that was when I saw it, the red blinking light. I immediately called 911, frantic, and started CPR. I wasn't trained, but I did the best I could. The paramedics arrived in minutes, but so did Mrs. Dawson, standing with her arms crossed, looking more put out than concerned. "He's too loud," she grumbled. "I didn't know it was medical," she continued, acting like she didn't just tamper with something that could have killed him. The paramedic snapped back. "You unplugged a medical device during a power outage. Are you insane?" Her response? She said the machine just looked like a noisy box. "There were no warning signs," she claimed. The EMT pointed at the large red labels on the machine. "It clearly says medical equipment," he explained. Mrs. Dawson just shrugged and said, "They're not HOA-approved stickers." And just like that, it became a game of her word against mine. To make matters worse, the police arrived after the EMTs alerted them. They questioned Mrs. Dawson, and her story kept changing. First, she said she thought the machine was abandoned. Then, it was an accident, and finally she claimed it probably just unplugged itself. I pulled out the security footage from my doorbell cam. There she was sneaking across my yard, unplugging the generator and walking off like she had just tossed out some trash. When confronted, she muttered something like, "Maybe I couldn't hear the labels over the noise." That was it. No arrest. Yet. They said they'd need to submit everything to the district attorney. My dad was stable by morning, but the doctor warned me bluntly. If he'd gone without oxygen for just a few more minutes, he could have suffered permanent brain damage. I couldn't shake that thought. How could anyone decide that their peace of mind mattered more than a human life? The next day, the HOA sent me a warning about violating a sound ordinance. No fine, just a friendly reminder. But the real kicker? They included a link to a PDF that outlined new medical accommodation rules that had just been created the day after the incident. Mrs. Dawson had been scheming behind the scenes to cover her tracks. I wasn't going to let this slide. That's when I decided to take action. By the time I got back from the hospital that night, I heard the hum of the generator outside again. When I stepped outside, I saw Mrs. Dawson standing there with two other HOA members. They had clipboards, and they were ready to give me another round of trouble. "Your generator is violating the HOA code." One of them, a guy named Brent, said smugly, pulling out paperwork. I had just watched my dad nearly die, and now they were harassing me over a generator. "We understand your concern," Brent said, "but all residents are subject to the same rules." I looked at them. "You know this is medical, right?" Brent smiled, oily and unbothered. "We're all subject to the same rules." It was clear now, this wasn't about noise. It was about control. I wasn't going to back down. I gathered all the evidence I had, emails, footage, memos, and sent it to a lawyer named Daniel, who specialized in HOA abuses. He reviewed everything quickly and told me this wasn't just a civil matter, it was criminal. Then I discovered something even more chilling. Karen had been secretly pushing a plan to drive out elderly residents like my father. It wasn't just about a noisy generator. It was about power. She had been working with developers, pushing for higher HOA fees and stricter regulations. I didn't need revenge anymore. I needed accountability. Within weeks, the local news picked up the story. The headline practically wrote itself. HOA official accused of disabling oxygen machine to silence noise complaint. By the time the trial began, Karen's reputation had already been shredded. The prosecutor laid out the timeline of events in excruciating detail, and when my turn came to testify, I didn't hold back. I told them everything: the panic, the CPR, the block paramedics. I told them how Mrs. Dawson stood there, uncaring, while they worked to save my father's life. When the jury deliberated, it took less than 2 hours for them to come back with a verdict: guilty. Karen was sentenced to house arrest, a hefty fine, and community service. The very thing she hated, the noise of medical machines, would now be her daily reality. With her gone and the HOA in ruins, the residents voted to dissolve the association. The bylaws were shredded, and the oppressive rules were repealed. A few months later, I visited my dad's room. We installed a new solar-powered generator, silent, efficient, and HOA-proof. I smiled as I heard it hum, knowing that this time there was nothing anyone could do to shut it off. And Karen? She faded into the background, becoming a cautionary tale. A new generation of neighbors had learned that no one could hide behind their power and bylaws forever. The wind chimes sang in the breeze, as loud as they needed to be. If anyone had a problem with it, well, there wasn't an HOA left to stop us. In the end, Karen's reign of petty control crumbled faster than she could ever have imagined. Her obsession with power, fueled by a misguided sense of entitlement, ultimately led to her downfall. What started as a small, seemingly insignificant noise complaint turned into a life-altering lesson in accountability, revealing just how far some people are willing to go to silence others. But in the midst of her vindictive actions, something beautiful emerged. A community united, stronger than ever, standing up for what was right. The once feared HOA was gone, replaced by a newfound freedom and solidarity that had been missing for too long. Neighbors, once passive and compliant, came together to ensure that no one would ever again abuse their position of authority. As for me, I watched my dad recover, and the generator hummed on, a reminder that, even in the darkest moments, resilience and justice can prevail. We reclaimed our peace, not just from the noise, but from the silent tyranny that had governed our lives for so long. The wind chimes continued to ring, louder than ever, symbolizing the sound of a victory hard won, and a lesson learned by all who had witnessed it. No one's comfort should ever come at the cost of another's life.